What are some true scary experiences that you Redditors have been through? Creepy strangers, unexplainable incidents, narrow misses, etc. Part 1. Please like and subscribe to support this channel. If it makes any difference, I will preface this by saying that I'm female. That fact may or may not make the following creepier. I used to live next to an eye hospital. One day, walking home, I was stopped by an old man who clearly had trouble seeing. He asked me to help him across the road to the hospital. I agreed, and he grabbed hold of my hand very tightly. At this point I noticed his fingers were stained brown from tobacco, covered in scabs, and his fingernails were very long and dirty. I started to think that my good deed for the day would be a bit regrettable. When we got to the other side of the road, he still had my hand grasped so tightly I couldn't politely pull away. "Do you want to see my eye?" he said. One of his eyes was squeezed shut. With his free hand he pulled the lids apart and I realized to my horror that he had no eyeball, just an empty socket. I started babbling, still trying to be polite, about how that was very interesting, but I had to go. Then he uttered the immortal words, "Do you want to put your finger in there?" He was pulling really hard on my hand, trying to force my fingers into his empty eye socket. At this point I gave up on politeness and struggled my hand free. It was difficult, he was really strong, and just ran for it. I could hear him laughing as I ran off. TLDR, stranger tried to force me to put my fingers in his empty eye socket. It was a dark and stormy night. I was spending the summer in Florida, with an aunt and uncle. I left with my uncle to go get dinner and bring it home, and when we got back, house was strangely quiet, their 3-year-old son quiet in his crib. Searched the house, could not find my aunt. Then we saw the 200-pound glass sliding patio door, storm panel was missing. It had been flung out onto the patio and my aunt was under it. We freaked, it took both of us to lift it off her. She was convulsing, froth running down her face. I called 911, uncle held her head. We figured it out over the next few hours, days. Aunt had been closing the patio door, reached up to turn off the light switch, and the house and she both were struck by lightning. Went in her hand and out her nose. Later we found all her nose hairs were burnt. She had somehow been flung outside with the sliding door. She survived, had electrical tremors and symptoms for about 2 years. TLDR, Mother Nature can be a total bitch. When I was about 6 years old I went to this seedy carnival that was set up in a mall parking lot with my dad and my grandma. We were waiting online for the infamous pirate ship ride. My dad got off the line to get us drinks. Maybe about 5 minutes later a man grabs my hand and says, "Come on. This line's too long," and starts leading me away. I remember my grandma yelling after me, "Mel, that's not your father." I looked up and saw this man wearing a matching pair of faded denim jacket and jeans, cheap NASCAR sunglasses, and a firefighter's mustache. When he saw that my grandma was screaming, he let go of my hand and vanished into the crowd. We told these cops that were standing by their cars and they said they couldn't do anything. It actually bothered me for a very long time. I was in India for work, staying at a fairly nice hotel. I don't do this often. I usually like to head straight to the room and order room service while watching a movie, but I decided to have a drink at the lobby bar. I had a drink on my own, there was no one else around in the bar and I made small talk with the bartender. I ordered another drink and decided to use the bathroom. I was gone a couple of minutes and when I got back I noticed that my drink, Scotch and dry, had a cloudy white rim at the top which isn't normally there. On closer inspection, the cloudy froth was settling into a powdery residue on the side of the glass. I asked the bartender what was wrong with the drink and he at first acted like he didn't notice anything. I was suspicious now and kept at it until he acknowledged he saw something. I mean, it was obvious, there was this froth 2 to 3 millimeters around the glass. Then he said that it always happens and it's nothing. I then looked him directly in his eyes and asked, "Did he put anything in my drink?" It's hard to explain, but his response, though it was no, told me everything I needed to know. So I made out like I was more curious than anything, and asked him whether he would taste it. He said no and said he would pour me another. I declined and said I would drink it, but I just wanted him to tell me if it was off or not. All this while, there was this awkward vibe where we both knew the jig was up, but we were pretending like this wasn't happening. I paid up and left the drink where it was, locked and latched my door. The whole time picturing myself lying in a bath of ice, sans organs. I used to work graveyards at a Circle K in a northern CA college town. CA law states that no alcohol can be sold between 2 to 6 a.m. At about 2:45 a.m., a couple of guys come into the store, go to the cooler to grab a couple of 18 packs of shit beer, Coors, Keystone. Can't remember now. I tell the leader of the duo that it's after 2, I can't sell the beer to him. As he starts getting irate, I offer him a free coffee, soda, candy bar, but I can't sell the beer. Cops and management had been all over our asses for questionable sales. The leader gets the 1,000-yard stare in his eyes and proceeds to start reaching for the small of his back, at which point his buddy says, "Stop, man. It's not worth it." The leader smiled at me and winked and said, "See you soon," and left. 2 days later I got fired for telling the regional dickhead that 2 people needed to be on at night, and a few other things, so my assistant manager had to cover my shift. That night he was robbed and had the shit knocked out of him by a guy that fit the description of the tool I dealt with a few nights before. TLDR narrowly avoided getting a shotgun shoved in my face, but a friend wound up with it instead. So many years ago I worked the night shift at a 7-Eleven in a neighborhood right next to a bad neighborhood. Until about 2 in the morning we had a security guard, but he didn't even carry a gun. From 2 until 5 you were on your own. After I was hired I found out this particular 7-Eleven had been robbed a few times, and when family members I knew found out I was working there they tried to convince me to quit. Well, as I worked nights I slept during the day, and one evening I woke up from this very intense dream where I was shot. It was so intense I woke up sweating with this feeling that I was punched in the chest. I decided to quit that day. Well, about a week later I go in to collect my paycheck and there's a new guy working the late shift. Seemed alright. I spoke to him for a moment and I left. I found out that the next night he was shot in the chest while working and died in the hospital. Backcountry skiing in some moderate fog. I thought I knew where I was going until it thickened up a bunch and I realized I really couldn't distinguish terrain features. White snow against a white fog backdrop. I was about to stop to figure out where I was until my eyes locked onto some sharp dark features that just materialized near my feet. I looked down just as I felt this floaty anti-gravity feeling and realized I was looking at not quite vertical cliff face that I had just lofted off of. I decided to just look like a boss, track out clear of the rocks, and stick the landing after what felt like a 200 meters fall, only to have my skis bury in snow and just stick. I blew out both bindings and made a face-first snow angel in deep powder. I rolled onto my back to admire what was actually only a 8 to 10 meters fall and laughed my ass off. Not me, but a friend of mine, female, about 22 at the time, worked for Google Maps as some sort of surveyor or photographer. Google sends her and another female coworker to some remote location in Mexico for a few days for business. The hotel they were staying at was apparently nice enough, but literally outside the walls of the hotel was a really rough ghetto with people living in boxes lining the streets. Anyway, the first day of the trip she and her coworker are taking a taxi to the location they have to survey, and at a red light, some crazy guy opens the door, tries to pull my friend out and then starts stabbing her in the chest with a knife. The cab driver pulled away, but not before she'd been stabbed 6 times. She survived but has pretty bad scars and has become a much different and quieter person since. I was driving home through back roads I had never been on and came across a bookstore in a tiny town in the woods. The bookstore was actually a house, where the front of the home had been converted into a store. There was a box on the porch that said, 50 books, so I stopped to see if there were any Stephen King books in there. Middle-aged woman comes out with a huge smile, and gives me a bowl of fruit and some tea. I'm like, this place is awesome, and rifle through books while eating the fruit and downing the tea. Inside the store, home, there were a lot of cool art books and stuff, so I spent some more time in there. She brought me more tea. Even when I said, no thank you, that's plenty, she kept refilling. Gave me dessert too, brownies and cookies. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was drugging me. It's hazy to remember the details, but at some point, she closed the shop, telling me to take my time looking at the books. She told me that she was going to go take a shower, and was gone for a while. When I was ready to pay, I had to wander back through her house to find her. I found her in her bedroom. She was in bed. I'm pretty sure she was naked. At the time, I thought, weird, she's watching an exercise video in bed. But later realized she was watching porn. You might think this is hot, but it isn't. She was my mom's age, and had been telling me how she reminded me of her kids in college. So, not hot. I told her I was ready to pay, and she told me how to open the register, so I went and opened it, put in what I thought I owed, took out the change, and left. When I stumbled outside, a fire engine drove by, screaming with sirens. In the distance was the glow of a big forest fire, and the stars were being covered by smoke. A tall man on a horse watched the fire truck pass. He looked right at me, took a piece of wood or something out of his mouth, and said, "Town's burnin'." I swear to God I have a crystal clear memory of this happening, even though I'm sure it couldn't have. By this point, I guess I was seriously tripping balls on something. I'm not a drug guy, so I don't know what I had, but I was out of my mind and could hardly walk. I got back in my car, and drove home along twisting roads on tall cliffs above the ocean. Twice I realized I was on the wrong side of the road. One of the times I realized this because a massive truck was headed straight for me, laying on the horn and flashing its lights. I kept thinking about how my car could be like an airplane and a submarine if I drove it off the cliff. I can't believe I made it home alive. Later I realized I was in that house for about 4 hours looking at books. At least that's what I hoped to hell I was doing. TLDR. A middle-aged woman drugged me, and I probably almost ended up as a gimp in her basement. When I was about 12, I had a lot of issues with night terrors, and rarely slept a whole night through. One night, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I sat down, half asleep and thinking of nothing but emptying my bladder and going back to bed when I see movement out of the corner of my eye. There was a man standing by the other door to the bathroom staring at me, not moving. He was wearing a tattered gray jumpsuit and had a crutch, little to no hair. I don't remember how I got down into the basement where my parents slept, but suddenly there I was, hysterical. My dad finally went up and looked in the bathroom and kitchen. Saw nothing but allowed me to sleep on the couch down there anyway. I didn't fall back asleep. About an hour or so later, I heard the sliding door to the bathroom from my sister's room and limping footsteps. The next morning my dad searched around and noticed that the fridge and pantry had been raided. Never caught the guy. Reposted from previous scary thread a while back. I once found myself in a cave, along with 8 or 9 other people. It was the middle of the Pennsylvania wilderness, and the only entrance was a small hole in the ground. To enter, you had to sit on your ass, grab a tree root, and drop about 7 feet down a steep wall to the floor. We all dropped in, and spent at least half an hour exploring this cave. My friend Dan taps me on the shoulder and whispers, "Dude, look at the ceiling." The ceiling was just high enough above our heads to hide the thousands of spiders crawling around on it. We tried to keep quiet about it, because we didn't want anyone to flip out, but there was no stopping it. Just seconds later the whole group noticed them. Everyone got silent, and you could actually hear the spiders crawling on the surface of the stone. It was an extra nerve-wracking situation, because the only way to exit the cave was to basically jump up and pull yourself out of a hole surrounded by spiders. 2 of the girls with us were terrified, and refused to climb out. They just couldn't muster the courage to put their faces next to a giant spider nest. They came around though, and everyone got out safe. I had the honor of being the last one to exit. Alone in a dark cave filled with spiders, and nobody around to give me a boost. Fortunately, Dan was brave enough to reach down in and give me a hand. When we first discovered that cave, we were all like, "I can't believe we've never heard of this place. Now I know why. That cave sucks." A few months later, I found out the cave is off limits in the fall, because of the rattlesnakes. Fuck that cave. I've posted this before, but here we go again. It was grade 11, and I had just moved to a new town. I quickly became attracted to this one girl, and would have given my left nut for a date. We got paired up to be partners in our food and fabrics class, and I totally pulled out all the stops. I was doing whatever it took to get a date with this girl. In the class, there were a couple projects where you would have to sew a pillowcase, or a pair of pajamas, etc. My family didn't have a sewing machine, so we would do the projects at her house. Upon these visits, I began to question how badly I wanted this girl. She lived in what appeared to be a wood cabin, and her father seemed legitimately insane. The walls were lined with animal skulls. The guy was a hardcore hunter. He had bear skin rugs and antlers all over the place. He would always walk around with his shirt off, drinking a Budweiser, chewing tobacco, carrying a shotgun. He never spoke a word to me. By this time I was starting to gain some friendships in the school, and one of the guys I met, Neil, noticed that I'd taken a liking to her. He then asked me if I'd heard about her parents. He then proceeded to tell me that her dad killed her mom, and got away with it. Her body was found in the middle of town, pumped by a couple of rounds from a shotgun. He got off on the charges from lack of proof, and she had to live with him because he was her last living relative. At this point, I was like, WTF? The story made no sense, and I wasn't about to believe it. But it definitely kinda rattled me. But there was no way that I was going to bring it up to her. Anyways, a little time passes, and I ask her out. I go to her place to grab her, and she's gorgeous. Her dad makes a comment about, you know what'll happen to you if you touch her, and suddenly the story is the only thing I can think about. We went skating, then to a movie, but I was terrified the whole time. I just couldn't get the thought out of my head, that her dad was going to kill me when we got back to her place. So after a subpar date, I start the long drive back to her place. We get to the end of her driveway, long driveway, she had an acreage, and she gets me to park and turn of the lights. She wants a kiss. At this point, forget her dad. I lean over and put some moves on. We stop, and I turn the lights back on. There's blood in the snow at the end of the driveway. I wanted to say something, but didn't want to sound like a pussy. Her dad was a hunter, right? I'm sure there's a logical explanation. I put the car in drive, and start the winding drive down her driveway. The trail of blood seems to be getting thicker, and I'm getting more freaked out. She still says nothing, as she's fixing her hair in her mirror. I keep driving. More blood. I turn the last corner of her driveway, and see my headlights shift from the trees to her father. Standing in the middle of the driveway. Covered in blood. Blood all around him. Huge fucking knife in hand. And what appeared to be a naked human body lying at his feet. I start hyperventilating. Suddenly, I'm crying, and don't know why. I piss my pants. Her dad takes me to the hospital. Turns out, I have had mild asthma for my entire life. And had a panic attack. The dad found a bear at the end of the driveway, shot it, drug it down the driveway, and skinned it, or, at least the part one saw, before we got back. Anyways, that was a little over 3 years ago, and I'm still with the girl. Her dad calls me a pussy all the time, except we've gone on hunting trips together, and I'm pretty sure he's a fan. Neil was a jealous ex. Her parents split up. Her mom's actually pretty awesome too. One time, I got a flat very late at night, so I pulled into a gas station. I tried putting air in my tire, but the valve broke off as I tried, causing the tire to completely deflate. I was standing outside my car, talking to AAA when a large, older black man approached me. He disregarded the fact that I was on the telephone, and asked if I needed help. A little weirded out, I smiled politely and thanked him, but told him I had AAA and they would take care of me. He insisted that he would help me, and gestured towards a silver car parked in the shadows, telling me he would drive me anywhere. I again thanked him, and told him no. He then said he was there to buy a soda and did I want anything? At this point I was fed up and a little scared, so I firmly told him he needed to go buy his soda, and I was going to get into my car now. He walked off. I locked myself in the car, and the dispatcher at AAA, who had been on the phone for the entire conversation, asked if I wanted her to call the police. I told her no, it was fine. I didn't want to come off as racist. God, I was an idiot. I've since learned the difference between racism and looking out for your personal well-being. Well, the woman from AAA said, you might not think you're in any danger, but I'm concerned, so I'm bumping you to the top of the list. We hung up, and I sat in the car, bored. At this point, I noticed my new friend had come out of the store and was standing about 20 feet from my car, staring at me. I thought this was very bizarre, and I started feeling a little nervous. I made sure my doors were safely locked. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I would take sidelong glances in his direction to see if he was still there. Eventually, he disappeared, and I heaved a sigh of relief. Then, suddenly, I saw him again. He had stepped back inside the store and was crouched behind a window cling, staring directly at me. This was too much racism or no, I was fucking freaked out. I called 911. 911, what is your emergency? I explained the situation, and that I was scared. Okay, I'll dispatch an officer to you immediately. Oh, no, that won't be necessary. I don't want to waste anyone's time. Could you please just stay on the phone with me until the tow truck gets here? That way, if he approaches me again, I can show him I'm on the phone with the police. Alright, sweetheart, can you tell me exactly where you are? Sure. I'm at the Hess on Colonial and Mercy Drive, it looks like. The dispatcher paused. Miss, I don't mean to alarm you, but I need to let you know you are currently stranded at one of the most dangerous intersections in the country. I'm dispatching an officer immediately. You need to promise that you won't exit your car for any reason and do not hang up the phone until either a police officer or your tow truck is there. So, I stay on the phone, nervous, but not really thinking anything would happen. I would occasionally glance back at the store to see if Mr. Creeper was still there. Until, finally, he disappeared. I told the dispatcher, very relieved by this turn of events when suddenly, the man somehow appeared in front of my car. He was walking right towards me, straight into my headlights. He reached down to adjust his pants when bam. Yeah, that's right. He pulled his penis out. I burst into tears and started shouting into the phone what was happening. I averted my eyes to the steering wheel, not wanting to look at it. Now, since I was looking at my steering wheel, it came as quite a surprise when he appeared at my passenger door and tried to force his way in. Adrenaline is a funny thing. No longer was I a broken victim. I was pissed. I started screaming all sorts of obscenities at him. I told him I was on the phone with the fucking police, and they were going to put his ass in jail. I called him a bastard, a son of a bitch, a cunt. The poor 911 dispatcher must have thought I opened my door to scream at him, so she in turn was screaming at me to shut the door and wait for the cops. After maybe 3 minutes of screaming at him, he seemed to realize I wasn't responding favorably to his attempts at wooing the gentle lady that I am. He strolled towards some gas pumps about 10 feet away, and stayed there. Several minutes after that, the tow truck rolls in. A gentleman got out of the truck, and started heading my way. He noticed I wasn't getting out of my car to greet him, so he pointed at his hat, which proudly stated AAA. He got right up to my car door, and I shook my head violently, refusing to get out. I cracked the door open, and his face changed. He saw that I had tears running down my cheeks and mascara smeared under my eyes. I explained quickly what had happened, nodding towards the man calmly standing by the gas pumps. He had put his dick away at this point. I saw the tow truck driver's face harden. Did that motherfucker hit you? He thought the smeared mascara was, in fact, a set of black eyes. I shook my head. No. Lock your doors and tell the police to get their fucking asses here now. I'm going to make sure this shithead doesn't leave. I watched him walk over to Mr. Creeper, and held my breath, expecting fists to be thrown. Instead, I saw what looked like a very cordial conversation. I found out after that he decided to pleasantly ask for directions to keep him here. Suddenly, we heard sirens. Mr. Creeper wildly looked in the direction of the sound, then directly at me, then glared at my knight in rusty armor. He realized he had been tricked. The police showed up, he was handcuffed, and I had to write the mother of all witness statements. They searched him, and it turns out he had a crack pipe on him, and that he was under the influence of cocaine. So yeah, that's my story. It wasn't pleasant, but I'm glad it happened to me and I was able to get him arrested. I shudder to think what would have happened to some other poor girl if he had gone free that night. TLDR, the first penis I ever saw belonged to a 40-year-old black man who was high on crack cocaine. Lucky me.